Imagine with me a father who could imprison his daughter for 24 full years in a dark basement underground. And worse than the imprisonment itself, he turned her life into a forbidden nightmare and fathered 7 children with her whom no one in the world knew existed. The surprise is that this story isn't a horror movie or fiction. It's a real crime that shook the entire world in 2008. And the dark protagonist was a single person named Josef Fritzl. Josef Fritzl was born in 1935 in a small town called Amstetten, Austria. From a young age, his entire life was torment. His mother was a terrifyingly cruel woman who controlled him as if he were her slave, depriving him of his freedom and beating him with horrific punishments. This cruelty planted a dark complex within him, a complex for control. Psychologists later said that what he lived through in childhood was the first spark that ignited the seed of evil inside him, which grew over the years and became hell. Josef grew up and became a very skilled electrical engineer. Everyone saw him as a respectable man, a smile on his face, and a life that seemed ordinary. But what no one knew was that this face was nothing but a mask, and behind that mask was a real monster, a monster that would make the whole world tremble at his name. In 1956, Josef, then 21, married Rosemarie, a simple Austrian girl several years younger than him. Her whole life was in the home. She was a housewife living to raise her children and serve her husband. Over the years, they had 7 children, and to the outside world, they seemed like a very normal family. A father who worked and provided, and a quiet, unassuming mother. But the truth was that Josef was never an ordinary man. He was controlling every single detail. Even his wife herself lived under his control, submissive to him in everything. And behind this facade, there was another dark side that no one knew anything about.
A few years after his marriage, Josef moved with his wife Rosemarie and their children to a new large house in the same town. This house was the opportunity of a lifetime for him, because he had a devilish plan in his mind that no one could imagine. Under the house was a spacious basement. Josef decided to develop it himself. On paper, it seemed like just a storage basement or a small workshop for him to work in. But the truth? He was building a secret prison. Sturdy walls, iron doors, and intricate passageways. The cellar was designed meticulously. No one but him knew its secrets. In the 1970s, during the Cold War, people in Austria were building underground shelters for fear of wars. Josef seized this opportunity and obtained official permission from the government to build a shelter under his house. The cellar he built wasn't just an ordinary shelter. It was like a complete secret apartment, about 55 square meters, containing bedrooms, a kitchen, a bathroom, electricity, and ventilation. All of this was locked with 8 soundproof iron doors that opened only with his remote control. He worked for long months building it at night so no one would see, and used his connections in construction companies to get high-quality concrete and iron, every detail calculated with precision, as if this place was the preparation for his own private hell, a dark secret waiting for the right moment.
The first days in the cellar were absolute hell. Elizabeth would scream and pound on the iron doors, but the cellar was completely soundproof and no one in the outside world heard her. Josef was always behind her, threatening her with punishment if she tried to rebel, cutting off her electricity suddenly, turning any attempt at resistance into a new nightmare. Her feeling of entrapment and fear grew every day. He was trying to break her psychologically, saying things to make her feel helpless, that any disobedience would ruin her life even more. Every move, every scream, every look was calculated to make her oppressed and depressed. And to cover up her disappearance from people, Joseph wrote forged letters in her name to neighbors and family, saying that Elizabeth had run away and joined a religious sect. Later, he forced her to write a letter herself to convince everyone that she was indeed living away from home and that her life was normal, while the reality was the complete opposite. As time passed, Elizabeth began to lose her sense of freedom. Every day was a routine of terror and control with no escape. Everything underground was calculated precisely: light, sound, movement, and all of this convinced her that she was confined to a small, boundless world. At the same time, Joseph appeared to people as an ordinary man, laughing, working, and living a normal life. Everyone saw him as the respectable man, with no idea about the monster underground, a terrible contrast between the ordinary world people saw and the hell Elizabeth was living in. Over the years, Elizabeth became completely confined. Everything in her life was under Joseph's control, every day a routine of terror and fear. She was living in a dark world, and her complete helplessness made her like an absolute captive under his will. Not just a daughter, not just a victim, but a person monopolized, without any chance of refusal or choice.
Elizabeth lived for 24 years, from 1984 to 2008, in that cellar. Without sun, without air, without any hope. Joseph assaulted her thousands of times and fathered 7 children with her. 3 of them lived with her in the cellar. 3 others Joseph took out to be raised by him and Rosemarie as if they were their grandchildren. And 1 died after birth, and Joseph disposed of the body. The children in the cellar never saw the outside world and lived in darkness and terrible conditions. Joseph managed to convince his wife Rosemarie that the 3 he took out of the cellar were his grandchildren. He told her that Elizabeth would leave her children on the doorstep and that he was just taking them in and raising them. Rosemarie believed this story, never knew the truth, and continued to see the children as her grandchildren, without knowing they were actually the children of Elizabeth and Joseph. In 2008, Elizabeth's daughter, Kirsten, 19 years old, developed a severe pain in her kidney and was dying. Elizabeth begged Joseph to take her to a doctor. At first, Joseph hesitated greatly. He was afraid. If Kirsten went out, people might discover the cellar and the imprisoned children, and his whole life could be turned upside down. But in the end, he agreed, but only after telling himself, maybe the doctor can save her quickly without anyone finding out. When they arrived at the hospital, the doctors were very surprised by the scene, an old man coming in with a 19-year-old girl, but the strange thing that made them suspicious from the first moment was the girl's appearance itself. Her skin was ghostly white, her veins visible, her hair weak, and her eyes full of exhaustion and mystery, something they didn't see every day. The whole scene made the doctors pause for a moment and feel that something was very wrong.
This scene made the doctors in reception stop in surprise, and before taking her in for examination, they asked him, "What's wrong with her? What is she suffering from?" He answered immediately instead of Kirsten. "She's been complaining of severe pain in her kidney for 2 days." Kirsten herself didn't say a word. She was silent and scared, and Joseph controlled the entire situation, controlling the speech so no one would know the truth. The doctors didn't waste any time. They took her straight for examination and indeed found that her kidney was damaged and that she needed to stay in the hospital for a few days under intensive care. And indeed they told this to the old man with her, after asking him to sign some papers as her father, as they thought. But the man replied to them and said, "I'm not her father. I'm just a relative, and her mother sent me with her." He said this and pulled a small letter from his pocket. The man continued and said that this letter was written by her mother. It had details of the girl's condition and that she had sent him with her on her behalf, nothing more. But at that moment, the treating doctor began to suspect. She tried not to show her suspicion, and had the man sign the papers with his name, which was Josef Fritzl. The doctor was astonished, not believing how a mother could leave her sick daughter like this with an old man. What was even more suspicious to him was that he noticed something unnatural about the girl beyond the damage to her kidney. Her excessively white skin made him feel a big secret was behind it. Accordingly, the doctor asked the medical staff to take a blood sample from her and analyze it.
And here was the shock. The girl's body had absolutely no vitamin D, meaning she had never seen the sun. At that moment, the medical staff realized the situation was completely abnormal, and accordingly, they immediately notified the police. The police responded to the report and arrived at the hospital. They too were surprised by the girl's appearance. They took the name and details of the man who brought her, and before they could go look for him, they found him coming into them with the girl's mother. The terrifying thing was that the mother's appearance wasn't much different from the daughter's. Her skin was white and pale, and she looked completely unnatural. Even stranger was the mother's own reaction, because as soon as she entered the hospital and saw the police, she ran to them, trembling, and begged them to keep the man away from her. The old man, Josef Fritzl. And indeed, the police arrested him immediately until they could understand what was happening. The police took the mother and began to calm her down from the state she was in so they could understand what had happened from her. She started by saying her name was Elizabeth and that she was the daughter of the man they had arrested. She kept pleading with them, telling them she would tell them everything, but on one condition, that they protect her from that man, who was her father. The investigators were surprised and asked her, "Why are you afraid of your father?" She replied and said, "The one in there is my daughter, but not just any daughter. She's from my father." The investigators were utterly shocked, and before they could comment on what they heard, came the second shock. Elizabeth told them that this wasn't her only daughter by her father. "I have 6 others besides her."
The investigators and officers couldn't believe what they were hearing. The details of the story were almost fantastical, and they couldn't comprehend how a father could do this to his daughter, or why. When the police opened the cellar, they found the children living with Elizabeth in horrific conditions. Joseph was arrested, and in 2009, he was charged with everything: imprisonment, rape, coercion, and even murder. The sentence was life imprisonment without parole. In court, he said something amazing and unbelievable, that he had imprisoned Elizabeth to protect her from the outside world. Of course, no one believed this, and psychological reports confirmed that he was a psychopath, narcissistic and sociopathic who enjoyed control and manipulating people. Rosemary, Joseph's wife and Elizabeth's mother, said she knew nothing about the cellar. Joseph had deceived her just as he had deceived everyone else. And the police found no evidence implicating her, but many people wondered how she hadn't noticed anything strange all those years. Elizabeth and her children received extensive psychological and medical support from the Austrian government. They were moved to a secret location, and their names were changed so they could live a new life away from the media and people. Elizabeth, despite all she had been through, was very strong and tried to help her children adapt to the world they were seeing for the first time in their lives. And here, the darkest page in the history of crimes the world has ever seen was closed. Josef Fritzl, the man who to people was a respectable father and ordinary neighbor, turned out to be a monster living among them without anyone suspecting.
But despite all the hell Elizabeth lived through for 24 years, her story isn't just a horror tale. It is also proof of unparalleled strength and patience. A girl who was imprisoned and deprived of light and freedom, yet she remained steadfast, raising her children amidst unending darkness. This story taught the world that evil sometimes hides behind a very innocent face, and that any normal man could have hell behind him. But it also taught people that no matter how long the night, the moment of light must eventually come. Elizabeth and her children began their lives anew, away from the past, while Joseph was sentenced to life imprisonment and lived the rest of his days locked behind 4 walls, just as he had locked them away long ago. But the difference is that their freedom returned, and his freedom was lost forever.